And welcome back to Game Escape, here today with Volume 2 of my weird Sega Saturn import video game series, video series that I started a couple months ago, taking a look at about 4 or 5 offbeat import titles for the Sega Saturn. And this is fun. Basically, one of the things that I do throughout the year is I just purchase as cheaply as I can, import Saturn games, and sit down on a Saturday night and play through them and see what they're about. Sometimes you get some winners, sometimes you get some awful games or games that you really can't understand. But it's fun, and one of the reasons that I really enjoy collecting for the Sega Saturn. So the first game we're going to take a look at today is Stakes Winner G, and this is a horse racing simulator. It's a fairly interesting, different kind of game. I've never played a horse racing game before, and I guess horse racing in Japan is one of the few, I guess, government-sanctioned means of gambling, so there have been a fair number of horse racing games out there. Basically, in this game, it allows you to control kind of every aspect of the horse racing business, we'll call it. I mean, basically, when you start the game, you have to pick a sire and whatever the mother is called of your horse, and based on your selections, your horse that you create will have different abilities, which is kind of nice. And then the objective is to take your horse through all sorts of different races and competitions, train him, boost his stats, and that all sounds like it would be a fun, quirky, offbeat kind of game. Ultimately, though, the gameplay dynamics when you're actually in a race are fairly simple. I mean, basically, you're hammering the B button and hoping that your horse responds and that you have enough stamina to get him around the track, which I found very, very, very difficult. Early on in the game, it's very, very hard to build up your horse to an acceptable level, and as a result, I found myself running out of steam after 2 or 3 races and being put out to pasture several times. It's a game that could be fun, perhaps, if you can understand. There's a lot of katakana here, and I guess if you were a dedicated fan of horse racing, maybe you would want to work through it, but the gameplay is so shallow that it to me wasn't worth exploring the latter stages of the game. You weren't even allowed to train your horse after each race, which would seem logical. Basically, you get maybe 1 training session per 3 races, I want to say, and the effect is not that great in the race. Basically, what you're hoping to do is position your horse on the track so you can get a power-up icon. It'll either be extra stamina or extra speed, and hope to place. And if you make gamblers happy, you can move on. A little too shallow for me to return to, but that's sort of part and parcel of this activity. Sometimes you get interesting games, different games, and sometimes you get games that are less than stellar, and that would be the case here. And next up we have K1 Fighting Illusion, an arcade-style kickboxing game based on the K1 promotion, kickboxing promotion, which was really, really big in Japan. Started in the mid-90s and actually just went out of business maybe in 2011, 2012. And honestly, this was one of the gems of this last round of weird Saturn import games. I picked this up, and all these games were part of a bundle that I got for $10. So I picked this one up, and I have to say I was pleasantly surprised. I thought this game would be kind of crude, crude early fighter, and it was actually a very, very simple, very, very smooth-running 3D fighting game. Very basic. You just sort of pick a fighter, and you fight in kind of all the various locations that they would hold K1 events, and actually the arenas are rendered pretty nicely. Control scheme is very simple. You have punch and kick buttons. You have a special move button, which is the C button. You can kind of circle to the left and right with the shoulder buttons, and then as you input your strikes, press up, down, left, right on the directional pad to change strike type. It plays a lot like the Virtua Fighter titles on the Saturn, which is a good thing, because those were, I thought, in all cases, in all iterations, in all types of games, whether it was Megamix, or Fighting Vipers, or Virtua Fighter Kids, those were really, really great 3D fighting games. And this is not made by Sega, but it kind of captures that fun and simplicity, and plays actually a lot faster than those games. And in fact, I picked up a K1 game for the PlayStation 2, and this game actually plays quicker than that. It doesn't look as nice. It's fairly easy. There's really not going to be a ton of challenge unless you ramp it up too hard. But, you know, if you follow the promotion like I did back in the day, the roster is pretty good. You have all the sort of early classic K1 guys, including the legendary Andy Hoog, the Swiss guy, who was just tremendous. You've got Ernesto Hoost as well. You know, can I recommend this game? Should you seek it out? Well, if you don't have any sort of K1 nostalgia, it won't mean much. It's not a great sports title compared to maybe what we're used to today, but for coming out in 1997, I think it really captured a lot of the fun and excitement of that sport. So this was definitely one that I was happy to add to my collection. Another game that I was pretty surprised by was Tetris Plus, which I didn't even realize was released for the Saturn. I'm not sure if it was released here in the States. I know after having played this game and doing some reading on it, of course it was released in the Japanese arcades. It was released on the US PlayStation. But this was a really fun game. Like I said, I thought Tetris on home consoles could only be enjoyed, at least for the retro systems, on the NES. You know, the classic Tetris. I know they had a couple Super NES games, but this is, I think, a nice return to what makes Tetris fun. You've got the classic Tetris mode, which you know, just looks a little bit brighter, a little bit more colorful, has a really neat soundtrack, and then you have I mean, you can do one-on-one, or yeah, so versus multiplayer, and then you have puzzle mode, in which you're trying to control this little archaeologist guy, clear lines, and allow him to fall towards an exit before a spiked chandelier sort of thing crushes him. It's pretty challenging, but it's a lot of fun. You kind of play through a number of different stages, different historical, archaeological sites, and if you beat all of those, the last stage is in Atlantis. It's a fun little game, and you know, for you know, essentially $2.50, it was a wonderful pickup. Don't need to know any Japanese to play it, and if you're just, you know, looking for that old school Tetris experience, you can't get much better than Tetris Plus. And lastly, in this 4-game bundle, we've got Sunsoft Pachinko, and there's a little subtitle there that I can't quite read, so I'll just call it Sunsoft Pachinko. If you guys follow the channel, you know that I really like Japanese gambling games, particularly Mahjong, and also Pachinko, and so this game gave me the best of both worlds. I had no idea going in, but you can play a standard Pachinko game and Mahjong, which is pretty unique. Now, I have a video up on Pachinko video games, how the game is played, what to expect, so if you're interested, check that out. Basically, this is a fairly common style Pachinko game. You've got 2 real-life machines by companies called Fuji and Daiichi, which I have not heard of. And they have a simulated parlor, and basically you take a character in there. You've got a daily spending limit. You've basically a chunk of cash that you've got to turn into more cash through playing Pachinko. You can check the stats on each machine. You start off at 10 a.m. Go in there and try to expand your money. Now, what's interesting about this game, it's one of the early pachinko games, at least that I've played, that actually has a machine zoom feature, so you can actually zoom in. It's very, very pixely, but you can zoom in on the pin layout and try to finally control where you're shooting the balls and actually watch the digital graphics in the middle of the screen. I would imagine it was a pretty impressive feature back in the day. If you play any sort of pachinko game from the PS2 upward, you will see that this has become a standard feature with a really, really fine level of detail on the actual tables. Now, when you're done in the pachinko parlor, you can actually go home. There's a day-night cycle. Go home and try to spend your winnings at the mahjong table. It's a very, very simple mahjong simulator, but it's just cool to have them both have both kind of popular Japanese gambling games in one. And I guess the idea here is to give you the experience of being a degenerate gambler in Japan, which is fun. So it's a nice little package. Again, pachinko games are not games that you would necessarily sit down and play for a long time. They're more cultural curiosities, really, but to have mahjong included makes this a very interesting package. So I thank you, as always, for watching Game Escape. I encourage you to check out the Sega Saturn. Pick up an import Saturn or pick up a US Saturn with the Action Replay card. It's a very, very cool, easy system to import for, and just have fun looking at the incredible variety of games available for it. So I will be back shortly with another video.